In early 1984, here I am in my 6th winter living the vagabond life in Key West. I am enjoying the great weather with leisurely mornings at sparkling ocean beaches, boating, bicycling, and each evening earning a little cash playing music at the Sunset Street Festival. About 5 p.m. every single day, a general convergence of tourists, locals, kids, lovers, cocktail-toting retirees, and vendors of every imaginable sort gather on the gigantic open dock and adjoining parking lot right downtown that faces the harbor and the looming sunset. As I walk into the throng, I spy my friends, also toting their instruments, and unpacking, we line up with our backs to the water and an open guitar case before us. Whoever shows up is in this evening's band. We just play old-timey standards for fun, and we don't have to rehearse. As we have every winter for years, we create a happy celebration out of an empty space, with a semicircle of a crowd watching us and the ocean sunset beyond, along with sailboats and tropical islands, amidst a boisterous street festival stretching down the waterfront. We talk to the tourists, make jokes, and play our mountain dance tunes, with guitar, mandolin, fiddle, bass, and me on my hammer dulcimer, occasionally singing a saucy sailor song. When the sun kisses the horizon, anticipation swells. As I'm leading our last tune, a slow, sweet waltz, I keep watching as the glowing disk sinks into the emerald waves behind me. We end our music with a flourish when the very last ray of sunlight disappears into the ocean, and a roar of applause signals the beginning of the evening's nightlife. We pretend all the applause is for the tune we just finished, thanking our bedazzled audience while they donate their cash. All the proceeds are immediately recycled into island bars, and we will probably end up at somebody's house in a much larger, diverse group playing homemade Irish music until all hours. But one day, a stiff, cold norther blows through, and the overcast harbor is covered with whitecaps as the wind whistles through the palm trees. Over by Christmas Tree Island, a huge wood sailboat has appeared at anchor. My friend Thatcher says that on the marine radio he heard the tall ship request that the immigration police send a boat to arrest a dangerous mutineer foreign crewman, which they have in chains, and also to bring 2 bottles of gin. Thus begins the saga of the Jens Juhl, a 100-foot sailing cargo vessel built 50 years ago in Denmark. The immigration officer radios back that even in the harbor, the water is too rough to send a boat, and they'll meet the ship when it finally comes to the pier. Over the next 2 days, the wind keeps howling, and repeated requests for gin are all that we hear from the sailboat. We can see a British Commonwealth flag flying at the stern and learn that the boat is registered in the Cayman Islands. When the weather improves and the ship's engine belches some black smoke, word goes out over town and there's a crowd waiting as she pulls up toward Mallory Square. I've never seen a single ship tied up on this dock because there are no other boats big enough to use this old railroad pier, which is 9 feet above the water. By the way, this is before the harbor is dredged for cruise ships. As the tall sailboat chugs in, we secure dock lines thrown by the crew to help them dock the ship. One guy hops over the rail and races to the liquor store to get the captain his 2 bottles of gin. A Bahamian guy who is standing inside a hatchway with only his upper body showing tells me his name is Vincent and that the ship almost sank coming across the Gulf Stream in the storm. But one of the crew walks over close and says quietly that actually Vincent got seasick, panicked, and was so desperate to get ashore that he attacked the captain with a knife. Soon, immigration officers escort him off the ship after the padlocks are removed from his ankle. He will be deported. The Jens Juhl has seen better days, but becomes another Key West attraction. A tall ship, a shabby workboat, history down on its luck, in the center of town with its 80-foot masts towering over the crowds at the Sunset Street Fair. The captain owner is grizzled old man Rick Miller, an experienced mariner and confirmed alcoholic. He and his ship are a matched pair of over-the-hill saltwater veterans. Holding the ship and crew afloat is first mate Charlie, young, enthusiastic, and experienced from years working on wooden whale ships in Mystic Seaport, Connecticut. I hear they need a crewmate, and I apply for the job and get hired for $50 a month and meals. The salary is a joke, of course, and I don't think I ever got paid. I move into the crew's quarters with my single duffel bag and buy heavy weather clothing at Key's Marine Supply, which even carries thick wool sailor sweaters. My days are now spent doing ship chores, painting, replacing rotten wooden planks, and hand sewing yards of seams in the old canvas sails. Charlie expertly keeps us busy and shows us how to do each task and knows where to find and use tools and materials. He also encourages us to climb the rigging and start to identify all the lines that control the sails. I sleep in the bow forecastle with Elwood, a farm boy from rural Florida, and Walter the engineer, a sincere but tragic figure scarred by army tours in Vietnam. The last crew member is Debbie, who is cook and captain's girlfriend. The old-school captain has a gruff way of talking about discipline and ship practices, but is actually a boozy presence all day and falls asleep by 8 p.m. All in all, a happy ship. Since we are a free attraction, tied up close on the public dock, all our chiseling, sewing, and painting is done with the occasional tourist kibitzing and asking questions. If the attention gets to be too much, Elwood and I entertain ourselves by pretending to speak loud Ukrainian to each other as if we don't understand English, and as far as I can tell, we pull it off. Even after moving on board, I still play music at sunset right in front of the ship by just hopping over the rail with my dulcimer and meeting my band there. One evening, Walter is coming back from a bar and gets into a shouting match with some young Cuban guys as he walks towards the boat. Elwood and I hop over the rail onto the pier in support, and things seem to blow over and the strangers are walking away when Walter yells the unforgivable words, "Your mother!" Immediately, the three wiry guys start running straight at Walter, yelling. Without thinking, Elwood and I pull Walter away as he kicks at his attackers and we drag him over the rail on board. Charlie shows up and mentions that we really should have been thinking that those guys might carry knives. Oh. We sailors always carry knives, of course, but in the ship's articles we signed when hired aboard, our knives must only have sheep's foot blades, which have a rounded-off tip but no point. Until now, I didn't really know why. One silly duty we have is standing watch on deck in shifts all night long. The captain insists we stay alert, which I find difficult. We are tied up at the north end of Mallory Pier, 1,000 feet long and very dimly lit. Rarely you might see something like an amorous couple. One late night, I'm lying on a hatch cover dozing when I notice a blue flashing light down the street. A police car pulls up to a waterfront restaurant. Fire engine sirens are approaching, and I wake up the captain. Soon, Front Street is full of shouting people as flames shoot out of broken windows. A fireman runs up to the captain and says, "The water mains are failing and we can't spray water. A Coast Guard cutter with saltwater hoses needs to dock right here, but the dock is too tall for them, so they'll need to raft up to your ship. We can see the cutter steaming out of the Coast Guard station, and soon it's tied up alongside us." The coasties quickly lay hundreds of feet of hose across our deck in the parking lot and start their powerful pumps. I slide over to the mainmast and climb up the ratlines to watch the flames from above, now licking out of holes in the roof. With a shower of sparks 50 feet high, the building caves in, and Chez Emile restaurant is no more. Later in the cold light of day, a pile of smoldering coals is watched over by a single police car. Insurance arson is suspected.
On another day, I hear our captain in an unusually energetic voice arguing with the city dockmaster. The dock rent is charged by the foot, and the captain says that Jens Juhl is 90 feet long on the deck. But the dockmaster is measuring the bowsprit and the mizzen boom hanging over both ends and gets 130 feet for a higher rent. Clambering back aboard, the captain yells for Walter to quickly start the diesel, which for us is an unusual and complicated procedure. Before Charlie can talk sense to him, he has us throwing off the dock lines and backing the ship until half of it is sticking out past the end of the dock. It's all we can do to keep the ship from grinding into the pier, but when we tie the lines back up, we only overlap the dock by 40 feet. The captain has his own way of doing things. When two wonderful performers from the Sunset celebration need to plan their wedding, he offers to stage the celebration on board and says he will perform the ceremony, a captain's privilege. All their friends organize a feast and a band, but I have my doubts about the ceremony the captain is putting together. But on a sunny, breezy day, he appears on deck in all his dignity, grandly motions the crowd to silence, and with an impish grin asks in a stage whisper, "Well, do you love each other?" Amid a chorus of cheers, Scotty the groom, bedecked in 3 pairs of swim goggles and a leopard skin suit, says yes, and soon jumps over the rail and into the harbor. What a party! But a few days later, this happy island life lurches to a stop, when to our surprise, the Bahamian crewman Vincent climbs out of a police car with a lawyer, points at the captain, and yells, "That's the man who kidnapped me." As the captain is hauled away in handcuffs, we learn that somehow Vincent has sneaked back into the United States and hopes to get his revenge, some cash, and hopefully a green card by bringing this lawsuit. Later that week, the entire crew walks over to the courthouse for the big trial. The future of our jobs, our residence on the ship, and our upcoming voyage all hang in the balance. Not to mention, we may see the captain sentenced. We all rise as into the courtroom the short but energetic Judge Martinez enters, sits down, and says, "Bring in the prisoners." We turn to watch a motley group shuffle and clank their way down the aisle, but we can't spot the captain among them. Finally, Charlie says, "Oh, there he is," and he points to an unfamiliar figure dressed in sparkling white with a new haircut. It turns out the captain happened to arrive in jail on laundry day, and his old greasy black hat and shirt are now blindingly white. Plus, they trimmed his beard. The prosecutor says that although this is a kidnapping case, it must be tried under British Admiralty law because the offense occurred at sea and the ship is of British registry. The judge immediately starts waving one arm and says, "Oh, I suppose that maritime law will allow the man to be whipped if he disobeys the captain." Our young lawyer jumps up and opens a thick book and says, "Actually, Your Honor, he could have been reduced to eating only bread and water, and yes, corporal punishment is allowed for mutiny." After hearing from several witnesses, the judge looks at Vincent and says, "Young man, there's not a thing I can do for you. Under the law of the sea, you are legally treated. I now order that you be deported back to the Bahamas. Case closed." We all cheer, but Charlie sighs at hearing this pronouncement because he knows that he will be the one responsible for getting Vincent to the airport and onto the plane. It's the responsibility of the ship to deliver the prisoner to U.S. Marshals for the flight to the Bahamas. And a month ago, when the ship first appeared in Key West and Vincent was deported, Charlie was escorting him when he tried to run. Charlie tackled him inside the airport. Captain Rick gathers the crew and says, "Well, we seem to have worn out our welcome in Key West, so we sail in 2 days for Grand Cayman Island. And after a frenzy of preparations, we do." But as the diesel putt-putts away from the dock and we're waving goodbye to our friends, the captain mentions that we're actually bound for Jacksonville for cargo. None of us really care where we're headed anyway, but this change might have saved our lives. As the Jens Juhl slowly steams out of Key West Harbor towards Sand Key, Elwood, Walter, and I lounge on deck watching the mangrove islands drift by without a care in the world. We, the crew, are second-class citizens in this traditionally run ship, with our bunks forward in the bow, hired only for our muscles, and forbidden to enter the rear of the ship except for work. Our lord and master officers, First Mate Charlie and the captain, who have private cabins in the stern, they look down upon us from the rear pilot house, enclosed by windows in their own separate world. They take all the responsibility for running the ship. Through the whole voyage, we aren't told what's going on, so we are actively spreading rumors and speculation. Fortunately, the Florida weather is warm, and even when it's raining, we crew sit out on deck in our foul weather gear, watching the horizon and spying through the windows what goes on in the wheelhouse. When we reach the open sea, Charlie opens the door and comes out and says, "Let's raise the sails." He patiently instructs us, signals the captain to steer into the wind, and coordinates two teams as we simultaneously raise both ends of the heavy gaff spar and sail while they're whipping around in the wind. After a lot of grunting and heaving, we are drenched in sweat, but the sail is secure and it fills and quiets down as the captain steers back off the wind. I can see many patches in the mainsail and where we have re-sewn 30-foot seams, but all in all, it looks shipshape. We take a breather before walking to the stern to raise the mizzen. After careful instructions, Charlie signals to steer into the wind again, and we repeat the hoisting process amid the loud flapping of both sails whipping about. Once we're off the wind again, the sails are silenced. Charlie is satisfied with all the adjustments and says to Walter, "Shut down the diesel, but keep it ready to start at any time." And now, the only sounds are the water swishing by and the cry of seagulls. We're only moving about 1 knot, but no one minds. Sailing up the Keys, we are in sheltered reef waters on a broad reach. Charlie motions me to follow him, and for the very first time, I enter the pilot house and see a small mahogany-paneled cabin with lots of windows and a huge ship's wheel I am supposed to learn to operate. With a lot of coaching, I sort of point the ship in one direction, but it's waving back and forth about 30 degrees. I quickly learn not to let the sails flap, which causes everyone on the ship to look around and stare at me. Otherwise, nobody seems to care that we're weaving all over the ocean. The compass is swinging wildly back and forth even in this calm water, but I can use the coastline to tell which way I'm steering. When I'm finally relieved by Elwood, I'm drenched in sweat again. I notice that he's no better than I am at keeping the ship on course. At sunset, Elwood goes to sleep to prepare for his midnight watch, and I try to learn how to steer in the dark. Over the next 2 days, we acclimate to the 24-hour routine of eating, sleeping, and steering. I find it impossible to sleep, though, because of the extreme rolling of this cargo boat with no cargo, and the very loud creaking and groaning made by the ship underway. A loud sloshing sound emanates from the cargo hold, which is obviously full of water. The captain says, "Oh, don't worry, we have the pump turned on." But we can't check it because the main hatch cover must stay securely fastened down. Ominously, in the light of dawn on the 3rd day, we see nothing but a pea soup fog with no land in sight. It becomes evident that the captain has no clear idea of exactly where we are. Since the wind is dying down, Charlie directs us to start the engine and douse the sails. For the rest of the voyage, we will live on the rainy deck in our foul weather gear, lost with no visibility. Although the engine reliably chugs us along at 3 knots, we have no working navigation instruments, and the VHF radio only works if you can see another ship. The depth sounder erratically changes between a depth of 40 feet and 70 feet constantly. Walter, in all seriousness, assures me that it's working correctly, and this means a Soviet submarine is trying to sneak into the United States underneath us, and whenever the conning tower is directly beneath, the depth sounder suddenly jumps from 70 feet to 40. But after we finally tied up at a dock, there's no difference in the readings, so I guess the submarine must still be directly underneath us. The only reason we finally made it to the dock at Port Canaveral at all was that in the afternoon a small Navy ship looms out of the fog in front of us and stops dead in the water. I was steering in the wheelhouse, and I heard the captain speak to the Navy on the radio. "Captain, ahoy the Navy ship on my bow. Could you give us our location, please? Over." "Navy ship. I am not allowed by law to give you any information, but I can see that you're in trouble because you're on the Cape Canaveral shoals. Over." "Captain, if you can't give me my location, what can you give me? Over." Navy. "If I were you, Captain, I would head directly southeast for 5 miles and make harbor at Port Canaveral. Over." Captain. "Thank you. Have a good voyage. Jens Juhl out." 2 hours later, the Cape Canaveral breakwater looms up out of the fog. Due to the dangerous shallows all around, this harbor is mostly used by mariners in distress, which we certainly are. A couple of days later, the bilge pump finally empties all the water out of the cargo hold. By the way, years later, dredging converts this to a cruise ship port, ruined of all its charm, just like Key West. When the weather clears, we find ourselves in a pleasant, small, mostly deserted harbor with a few islands around and the launch towers of the spaceport looming in the distance. There seems to be no officials around. I guess the captain has found a payphone because after a while a car pulls up and his 2 grown children jump out and give him a hug. Of great interest to the crew is his college daughter Christina, a bewitching brunette with a shy smile. We all have dinner on the deck, and for the first time the captain shares out his gin, and we all recount our adventures hilariously as just funny and no big deal. But I, for one, am never leaving the land on that ship again, but I don't say so. The next morning, the bright mood on the ship continues as we have a delicious citrus breakfast outside in the sunshine. Charlie tells a story from the Caribbean island of Bequia, where the ship delivered some cargo, and an island boat carpenter made them the wooden dinghy that is now slung on the back of the ship. Charlie says it's a beautiful small craft and has a sailing rig. The captain looks speculatively at me and says, "John, I know you're a sailor, and Christina here would love to go sail over to those islands and take a look around. Why don't you just sail her right over there?" And Christina flashes me a dazzling smile. Containing our surprise, Charlie and I lower the dinghy down into the water and rig the sail. Christina appears like an angel, for some reason dressed in a billowing white cotton dress, but she has on rubber boots, jumps in the dinghy, and on a very pleasant breeze we sail out onto the emerald waters. I find the dinghy sails very easily. We chat away casually about her college days while the boat leans over and sails us towards the uninhabited islands. I'm very aware that we are in clearer view of the ship even as we beach the boat at the first island a mile away. Christina is quite a sight, beachcombing in her white dress, and chatters away as we eat our picnic lunch. I'm a little disoriented by this turn of events, after living for a month as a grubby crewman on a dirty freighter, but I managed to keep up in the low-key conversation. When we sail back to the ship, she skips up the ladder and disappears while the crew raise the dinghy back into its davits. Our group dinner al fresco turns out to be a goodbye party for Charlie, who is returning to his job at Mystic Seaport. The captain makes a gracious speech thanking him for making the Jens Juhl into a happy ship. We all raise our glasses and drink his health. Then the captain says, "So, we have a vacancy, and I am happy to announce that I've decided to promote a member of the crew to become an officer, and I present to you the new first mate, our great shipmate John. I am thunderstruck. I see Christina beaming at me, and I realize she has been judging me for her father, and this is her stamp of approval. I can see that the captain is stuck between a rock and a shoal, and has no way to get anyone else for the job. For me, the whole voyage has been a lark, but now the specter of maintaining a leaky wooden ship with a penniless alcoholic captain looms before me. But I smile and accept congratulations and raise my glass with the rest. However, that night I have a hard private conversation with the captain. I say, there's no way I'm going anywhere on this ship without 2 huge gasoline deck pumps to keep the water out of the hold. The captain is not even taken aback. He just smiles and looks at me straight in the eye and says, "Oh, that wasn't dangerous at all." But all I can say is, I'm sorry. The next day, the rain is pouring down as I pack up my belongings to leave the ship. Breakfast is a gloomy affair, with Christina glaring at me, unlike the merry cherub she was yesterday. I knock on the cabin door and ask the captain for my passport, which he has kept with the ship's papers. He seems subdued and says there are so many leaks in the deck above his office that the rain is pouring down, and he can't open the file cabinet without soaking everything in it. Would I mind waiting until the rain stops? I don't really know if he's stalling me or to trust him, but I nod and say, okay. Sure enough, after an hour, he walks up to me, hands me my passport, and wishes me bon voyage. I take a taxi to the airport and get to sit up in the front of a very small plane that flies me back to Key West in 90 minutes. When I get back home, I realize I've only been gone for 3 days. That's the end of my story about a classic wood Baltic trader cargo ship from the age of sail, which lived about 90 years. Jens Juhl sailed to many countries and crossed the Atlantic, and for the record, her name in Danish means Jens Christmas and is sort of pronounced Jens Juhl. I learned that months later the Jens Juhl was docked in Beaufort, North Carolina, and owed a lot of money for dock fees, when a hurricane broke the dock lines, blew her under a bridge, and she lost both masts. Sometime later, the captain was working as a crew member on another ship and apparently fell overboard at night and was lost.